He was a premiership player as a teenager and a premiership coach in his 30s. Now, in his early 60s, he's still mainstream in the AFL as a prominent, provocative commentator in print and on radio after many years in television. Welcome to Open Mic, Wolsey.
Thanks, Mike.
Interesting ride.
Well, it has been, and who would have thought that 47 years ago, when I went down to Carlton as a kid, that I'd still be part of AFL footy.
You got 50 in you?
No, Mike, next year will be my last year. And
in all forms of the media?
Yes.
And what prompted that decision?
There's other things that I'd like to do, and my partner and I, Julie, we're looking to live overseas in 2014.
To live?
Yes, we're going to live in France, so that's something that we've wanted to do for a while, and the opportunity's there to do it, so we will.
You gonna have a vineyard or some cheese and rolls?
I'll drink some wine, but I won't have a vineyard.
I bet you will. Let's go all the way back to 1967. You're 16, you're at Coburg High School, you travel to Carlton, to Princes Park to train via the tram. Ron Barassi is your coach, and you barrack for Essendon. Now, I know people won't believe that last bit, but you were an Essendon supporter, weren't you?
I was a mad Essendon supporter as a kid. My mother was an Essendon supporter, and I used to go to the footy with her, and we'd pick up a few mates, and we'd go out to Windy Hill. Oh, we did it for years, and, you know, players like Jack Clark and Ken Fraser and Alec Epps, they were heroes of mine.
Why do you... hate's a strong word. Why are you so hostile towards Essendon these days?
Oh, look, a lot of it's made up, but I guess...
Oh, is it?
Yeah, part of it was that Kevin Sheedy was there, obviously, for a long while, and we were pretty fierce rivals as players and coaches. I also played my last game of AFL football at Windy Hill, and I buckled my knee, got carried off, and... as they did in those days, they gave me a bit of abuse and a bit of spit as I went up the race.
Super career at Carlton, no doubt about that. You played 218 games, 3 flags before you turned 23 and ended up being captain. I mean, that's where your heart lies, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The Carlton Football Club was so good to me in so many ways, and Ron Barassi in particular, John Nichols, who succeeded him as coach. They were my first 2 coaches for the first 10 years that I played, and obviously had a massive impact on me. And I played with some terrific players, and we played in premierships, and we celebrate those premierships today.
1972 is my favourite memory of you. You're playing this, the grand final against the Tigers. There's 50 goals kicked in that match. You kicked 6 of them. Is that your personal highlight?
It would be. I think to play in a premiership and to play well in the game, I don't think you can do much better than that. And as a youngster, I can remember going to Norm Smith's home, and Ron Barassi took us there, and the thing that Norm Smith said to the Carlton players was that the biggest test, the biggest stage was MCG finals, and to play well in finals was the true test of a footballer. And I guess, you know, for us to have won that premiership and to have played well in it, it made me feel pretty good.
Were you a dirty player, Wolsey?
Yes.
No conditions on that, you were just dirty?
Well, look, it was a pretty tough era, and I played under John Nichols, and he was the protector and the leader at Carlton. When John finished, I looked around and there wasn't too much there as far as doing that role. Don't get me wrong, there were players like Percy and Trevor Keogh who would back you to the hilt. But as far as players, you know, say squaring up, and in those days square-ups needed to be done, I'd sort of carried a bit of that.
What was the biggest hit that you laid?
Look, I knocked Jimmy O'Day out once.
I get scared when I hear this story.
And I got squared up upon, like the St Kilda boys got me, and that's fine. I got no problem with that.
Is that the day that you heard the message amongst the St Kilda players that Walls wasn't to leave the ground on his feet?
Yes. And I didn't.
I remember a famous case involving you and Francis Burke. I think it was at Princes Park. The Richmond champion was reported for kicking you, correct?
Yeah.
He beat the charge, didn't he?
He did.
How did he beat it?
Well, they got that many character witnesses. They got everybody from the Catholic Church bar the Pope. And the character evidence was outstanding, so much so I felt I needed to apologise for being part of it. There wasn't too much in it. and I'm glad he got off it, yeah.
Did you ever get reported for kicking?
No.
Did you ever kick anyone?
Yes. Not a vicious kick, but
No.
an ankle tap or two. I actually gave an ankle tap to a North Melbourne player when I was very young.
Mm.
And I thought no one noticed it. Ron Barassi was captain coach, and as we came up the race at Princes Park and we got in the rooms, the door was slammed and he grabbed me by the throat and slammed me into the wall.
Did he really?
And said, I saw what you did, don't do it again.
Was there a similar incident involving Peter Knights?
There probably was, Mike, yeah. And I regret that. And again, it was an ankle tap, but yeah, because he didn't deserve it.
Mm.
Some people do deserve it.
Did anything come of the Knights incident?
No, it played on my mind a bit and I felt I should apologise, but I never have.
Never have. You left Carlton on a sour note. The year's 1978. Ian Stewart is appointed coach. I reckon a month or two into the season, Stewart wants to relieve you of the captaincy.
No, it was earlier than that.
Early, was it?
Yeah, it was after the first game.
After the first game. Tell us what happened there.
We played Richmond and we got beaten by about 10 goals. And immediately after the game, he cancelled the social function, which was wives, girlfriends having a dinner. And that's okay. On the Monday night, I went to training, did my warm-up laps, and he called me into the middle of the ground, just the two of us, and he said to me, "You didn't try."
Really?
And I told him, "You've been here 5 minutes, I've been here 15 years. Don't you tell me that I didn't try."
Wow.
And then he told me...
How did it end?
Well, he said, "I don't want you as captain. I don't want you to come to match committee." And I sort of sensed that he didn't want me. So how did it end?
I'm talking about on the ground. So you've had this exchange. He said that you didn't try. You resented that, took exception to it. Did you then part company or was there more dialogue?
No, we parted company, yeah.
Off to Fitzroy for 5 years. And then you returned to Carlton in '86 as coach in what was seen to be at the time a bizarre swap with Walls going back to Carlton and David Parkin leaving Carlton for Fitzroy. How did that all eventuate?
Well, let me say this. I went to Fitzroy and played there for 3 years, not very well. Coached there for 5 years and just loved it. So I had 8 years at Fitzroy, which were 8 years that I will cherish and still cherish. How did I go back to Carlton? I coached Fitzroy for 5 years. At the end of the 4th year, I got a phone call from John Elliott, who I'd never met, because when I played at Carlton, he wasn't about. I think he was mainly in America. And he said, "I'd like to meet you at the jam factory where his offices were." So I went to meet him and he said to me, "I want you to coach Carlton next year." I said, "I can't do that because I'm contracted to Fitzroy." And he said, "Well, don't worry about that. We can sort that out." I said, "Well, no. I've got a 5th year at Fitzroy and I'm going to coach there." And I can remember driving away thinking, I've just knocked back the Carlton coaching job.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It was a situation where at the end of that 5th year at Fitzroy, I didn't know whether Fitzroy wanted me to continue on as coach. And I put it to them, "Do you want me to coach next year?" And I was told, "You can throw your hat in the ring," which didn't please me because I'd been there for 5 years and it had been Fitzroy's most successful 5 years in its last 50 years. So I was disappointed in that. And anyway, with a bit of pressure in the media, Fitzroy came to me and said, "Well, we'd like you to go on as coach." And I said, "OK." Well, about 5 days after that, Carlton got knocked out in the finals and I got another phone call. And this time it was Ian Collins. And he said, "I want to meet with you and John Elliott and so on." So I met with them and they said, "We want you to coach Carlton." I was in a bit of a quandary because I'd agreed to coach Fitzroy. But I also thought, well, I'd love to be coach of a premiership team. Fitzroy didn't afford you that opportunity, just with pure finances. And Carlton did. So I took the Carlton job.
And did you leave bad-blooded with Fitzroy?
Well, there were people at Fitzroy who were really disappointed in me, and they had good reason to feel that way. But it was a tough decision that I had to make. I couldn't have given Fitzroy any more in the 5 years that I coached them.
You introduced the huddle, which is where the players congregate at centre-half back at a kick-in, and then they all spread. Now, Was that your idea, and what was the origin of it?
The origin of it was my two fitness guys at Fitzroy, Chris Jones and Tony Knight. Both of them had experience with overseas sport, particularly American basketball, and in England with rugby. And so they would question AFL. They would say to me, why do you do this? Why, when the ball's kicked in at full back, why do they kick it to a pack of players and point to where they're going to kick it? So as simple as those questions are, the game was played the same way for 100 years. If you had the ball, the opposition would follow you. So if your teammate had the ball, wherever you moved, your opponent would follow you, because that's what he's told, follow your man. Well, we can take some advantage of that, because if we put all of our boys on that side, well, they're going to follow us. You create space on the other side.
You go to Carlton 1986, playing the grand final. You win the flag in 87. You finish top 3 in 88, and you're gone halfway through 89. Now, I remember that, from memory, Warwick Kappa, you were playing the Brisbane Bears at Princes Park. Kappa kicks a late goal. Brisbane beats Carlton. Robert Walsh gets the sack. It's a dramatic fall from grace, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was 3.5 years, and as you mentioned, 2 grand finals, a loss, a win, a third placing, and then the sack halfway through that 4th year. I deserved to get the sack.
Did you?
I did, because I was very negative, demanding, looking for fault, and the players would have had a gutful of me by then. Having said that, I felt I was left to my own devices a bit, but in those days the coach was expected to know all and be all. Looking back, it would have been nice to have got a little bit more support to sort of say, well, maybe you need to change your ways a little bit.
Did you have a lieutenant there? No.
Not really, no. I was, and that was my fault, because I didn't delegate too much, and I think probably they were too afraid to say, well, Wolsey, try this.
I think, to be fair, and this is not meant to be harsh, but you were seen to be blunt, demanding, uncompromising, and occasionally brutal in the way you treated your players, particularly in training sessions. I mean, there was some notorious programs that you had at training when you were angry with them, weren't there?
Oh, solid sessions, absolutely. Having said that, I reckon if you speak to 95% of the players I coached at Fitzroy, Carlton and Brisbane, they will say, we're really glad he coached us that way.
After Carlton, it's off to Brisbane for 5 years with the Bears. Very tough times, weren't they? And it was a new club. AFL didn't service it properly. You were the spruik of the coach, all things. How difficult was that up there?
Gee, I could write a book about it, and I might write a book about it. How difficult was it? It was tough. It was tough because no one had much interest in you up there. The membership when I got to Brisbane was 1,800. The crowds were 5, 6 and maybe 7 or 8,000 at Carrara if you played Collingwood, Carlton, Essendon. Having said that, it was 5 of the most satisfying years of my footy career.
Why?
Why? Because, well, when I went there, no one wanted the job, and when I left, they were lining up for the job. When I went there, we were based at Carrara with nothing solid around us. Everything was portable. When I left, they were at the Gabba, and they were putting in plans for a really good stadium. When I went there, you had one of the oldest lists in the AFL, and when I left, it was one of the youngest, and so many of them went on to be triple premiership players. And when I went there, you had a group, some of them who weren't fair income, and you had others like Roger Merritt and Michael McLean and Scotty McIver and Johnny Gastev and Martin Leslie, who were absolutely fair income. Halfway through the first year, we hadn't won a game. And there were a few players that I had got rid of at the halfway mark. And Roger Merritt came up to me, and he hadn't said much to me in this first year. And Roger came up to me and said, I can see you're fair income, I'll give you 100% of what I got left. And that meant a lot to me.
In Brisbane, There's a famous story, a notorious story about you, Robert Walls as the coach. A player called Shane Stremple has driven you to distraction. You don't know how to handle him. In the end, you put him in a ring, or you circle him with the players, the Brisbane players, and they take turns at sparring with him. True?
True. True to the extent that we did a lot of sparring. The boxing gloves were at Brisbane when I got there. That was part of their summer training, their fitness training. They enjoyed it. So the gloves came out at training quite often. And Stremple had let himself down and his teammates down with a lack of discipline. And on this particular night, I felt he needed to have a chance to earn a bit of respect within the group. So, sure, he was put in the ring. We didn't have a ring as such, it was on the ground. And he went a bit longer than the average player would have.
But didn't you rotate players against him?
Oh, he had 2 or 3 go out and spar with him.
Is that all, 2 or 3?
Oh, might have been 3 or 4. Let me tell you this. I never lost a second's sleep over that. I went home that night, slept without even thinking about it, and for the next 10 years, didn't even think about it. The next 10 years, did not even think about it. And then a documentary was made, and they had a reenactment of that, and it was dramatic.
Was it faithful?
And it was eerie. No, I don't think it was. I believe I was set up. And so too to a lot of the players who were there that night, because once they saw it, they contacted me and said, you know, the wrong thing's been done by you.
After the break, and I'm not sure you're going to like this, but we're going to talk about the Battle of Britain. Your relationship with Kevin Sheedy, it had its origins when you were playing for Carlton and he was playing for Richmond. How hostile was it on the field?
Oh, we didn't like each other at all.
I remember sitting on the 3AW panel with you one Saturday, and we talked to Kevin Sheedy, and from memory, Kevin Sheedy raised the sniper tag. Not all snipers were in Vietnam. You, and I think rightly, believe that he was referring to you. That issue erupted soon after on Talking Footy on Channel 7. Some of the most dramatic footy television I've seen.
Don't talk in riddles. Answer the question, and the question is...
Robert, I never mentioned your name.
Was I a sniper?
All the 70s and 80s, that people out there making the comments. And if I said on the radio, if the hat fits, then we all wear it. And I wrote about myself.
It's just a bit sad that you go so far with your bluff, and when your bluff's called, you back off.
I took exception to him not being direct and saying, well, you were a sniper, because I would have accepted that. Didn't worry me at all. But he just beat around the bush. He was being very general. And I challenged him to be specific. If you believe I'm a sniper, tell me I'm one. Don't just go on with your games. Because it wouldn't have worried me in the slightest, but he wasn't prepared to do that. The other thing that annoyed me was that he had a shot at my coaching of Brisbane and said, oh, you went up to Brisbane and hid.
That's offensive and insulting.
Well, it can be offensive.
Let me tell you, you wouldn't know what it was like to have an owner of a club who wanted to close it down every second week. You don't know really, you haven't got a broad experience of coaching. You've been at the one club for 20 years. I went up to Brisbane and I know the effort that was put in by a lot of people there, so I regarded that as an insult to the Brisbane Football Club, Brisbane Bears, the players, people like Scott Clayton, Andrew Ireland. And don't forget that some of those young players, a few years down the track, beat Essendon in a premiership.
They did. Do you like him?
I can't say I like him because I don't know him well enough, but I wouldn't say I disliked him.
He says he's growing on you, that you're growing on him.
Like a wart.
1987, Wolsey, big year for you. Then you take off to London for an event called the Battle of Britain.
Yes.
Tell us your memories of that. Carlton are playing North Melbourne at the Oval.
Yeah.
You pick it up from there.
I don't want to go. I don't want to go there.
You don't want to go to London?
I don't want to go to London. And I've told Ian Collins and I've told John Elliott, I don't want to go because it's a junket. The boys have won the premiership. Let them enjoy the premiership. And somehow or other they said, well, the sponsorship we get for this game goes to pay your contract. I said, well, why doesn't it go to pay Kernahan's contract or Bradley's contract or whoever? Why is it my contract? And they said, you got to go. So we play the game. They punch us up. And I'm just thinking, 2 weeks ago we're at the MCG doing what footy's all about, and here we are in this ridiculous game here. So Clarkson did what he did to Aitken, and it had to be squared up upon. And I didn't have to look for volunteers because Jimmy Buckley and Jono, they just said, Reece, they just said, well, we'll make sure that he gets squared up on.
On the coach's instructions?
Well, I was happy for it to happen.
Did you ask for it to happen?
I said he's got to be squared up upon. And they knew that. Alistair Clarkson knew that. John Kennedy knew that because John Kennedy could have taken him off the ground. John Kennedy knew that what he'd done was beyond and knew that it needed to be rectified. And it was.
When Clarko, who was young himself, I think he was only a kid then too, when he hit Aitken, did you pick up the phone and dispatch it in the direction of John Kennedy?
I did. I was up in the little stand and he was down at ground level. I didn't try to hit him with the phone. I wanted it to land near him just to get my attention and just say, hey, this is bullshit, John. You know, we should call the game off because this is just rubbish. The phone smashed behind him and he didn't flinch. After that game, my players were spread on the floor in the change room at the Oval, and Aitken's got the broken jaw, Kernahan's got what he's got, God knows what else. And that was, in a way, the beginning of my end at Carlton, because Elliot was there with a few of his Foster's mates, and I said to him, I hope you're satisfied. This is the cost of the junket. I hope you're satisfied. Ian Collins was filthy with me for saying that. And the next day he said, I want to meet you at 7 a.m. the next morning. So I met him. And he virtually said, how dare you speak to a Carlton president like that? And I just said, well, I don't care. I said, it needed to be said. I knew they wouldn't sack me because we'd won the premiership 2 weeks before. I remember going back to my hotel room and my wife Erin was there and she said, how'd it go? And I told her and I said, they won't sack me. I said, but when the wheels start to wobble, I'll be in trouble down the track. And it's funny, I probably, as great as winning a premiership is, and it is the greatest, and I enjoy it today more than ever with that group of Carlton players, you know, the bond's there 25 years on. As much as that's what you wanted, we got it, and 2 weeks after we got it, I was as flat as a tack.
You're coaching Brisbane, Nathan Buckley arrives, it's 1993. What was your understanding of his tenure with the Brisbane Bears?
I knew he'd come for 1 year only, and I was sort of responsible for that because when I got up there, that many players who'd been signed by Brisbane refused to come. And I even had players, their managers or the player themselves would say, don't draft us because we won't come because we don't want to go up there. And before my time, too many players like the Jarman brothers, and Chris McDermott, they just turned their back on Brisbane and got away with it. And I felt that a stand needed to be taken. Now, Nathan Buckley was on Brisbane's list. Now, there are lots of reasons why that was the case. But the bottom line, he was on the list. Collingwood desperately wanted him. And I, for one, said, no way known does he go to Collingwood without first playing for Brisbane. Now, you might say, well, how could he come for you for 1 year and go? Had we not got him for that 1 year and he stood out of AFL football, we lost our grip on him. So, by him coming to Brisbane, we at least got him for a year, got some credibility that we stood firm, and OK, I knew he was going to go to Collingwood, but we got their first choice in the draft, which was Chris Scott. We got Starcevic and Troy Lehman, who were handy, and there might have been a few other things.
Like?
I suggest there might have been some cash.
You're suggesting any figures?
I got no idea.
The Collingwood deal with Buckley was done, you believe, when Bucks arrived in Brisbane?
Yes.
It was done, OK. The Richmond coaching experience, Wolsey, it didn't end well. It was short-lived, probably should never have happened. I remember my own view, and following you fairly closely at the time, was that you were finished with coaching and they talked you into it.
Yeah, that's right. I left Brisbane for a couple of reasons. Is that I'd had 5 years there. My mother was ill, Erin's mother was ill, and David, our eldest son, he was going to be taken by Carlton under father-son rule. So there were reasons to come back to Melbourne. So that was decided halfway through that 5th year that I was up there as coach. And the Age had offered me a job to be full-time football writer. and I'd accepted it. So I was happy, more than happy to come back and do that. Well, as it turned out, the Brisbane job was taken by John Northey. He had a year of contract to run at Richmond. He jumped out and took the Brisbane job. Richmond's after a coach, and they spoke to me and said, we'd like you to coach. Nice to be asked, Mike. And looking back on it, I shouldn't have taken the job.
Was Ross Lyon one of your assistants at Richmond?
Yes.
You, this is my statement here, my assertion to you, you single-handedly got him the job at St Kilda.
I don't think that's right.
Well, he wasn't in the applications, as I understand it. You'd gone through the first and maybe even second round of interviews, and then the grapevine says, Wall says, there's a bloke up in Sydney that we should have a look at. Very good, I think we should interview him.
He wasn't. Look, when you looked, when I was on that committee to help appoint the St Kilda coach, we probably started with a list of 30, which is ridiculous. And you immediately say 20 no, and it was 10. And then Ross's name came up as should be one to be considered.
What did you see in Ross that made you so keen for him to at least have a crack at this?
He's smart and he's tough. And he's got respect for the sort of person that he is and the life that he leads. And I reckon he thinks on his feet far better than most.
Well, see, your relationship with the media wasn't healthy when you were a player and probably a coach. I think you mellowed a bit when you went north to Brisbane because there was a bigger job that it entailed. But you've spent the past 15 years working in the media and you seem like you've enjoyed it.
I've loved it. It's been, I'm very grateful and thankful that I had the chance to do that. It gave me a chance to enjoy football. I never really enjoyed coaching. I didn't allow myself the chance to enjoy it. It was always the stress, the pressure, the strain of coaching. So I didn't give myself a chance to relax, and I regret that. But anyway, I felt I could work the media and give my opinion, because I don't reckon there's many in the media who've seen football from all the angles that I have. I never felt too bad about being critical of a player or a team because I've been there and I know what it's like. It's not like I'm talking from a position where I wouldn't know.
Well, it's been a massive contribution. I mean, there's been a couple of hiccups along the way between you and I, but your contribution on the ground, from the coach's box and in the media has been immense. You should be proud of that. I'm sorry you're not going to get to your 50 years in the business, but good luck for the future and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.